Sam and I affirm in our first point of contention is creating intelligent electricity. As the Electronic Privacy Information Center writes, one of the most prominent examples of the Internet of Things is the smart grid, which is used to better manage energy consumption by creating a line of communication between machines to increase efficiency. As the Department of Energy furthers, smart grids create a plethora of technology, including sensors and monitors, to ensure that everything from simple household items to large manufacturing plants are running as efficiently as possible. The usage of real-time data translates to better energy production. As Gil Reitenbach of the American Institute of Engineers writes that the General Electric Company has used the Internet of Things to increase electrical output by 20%. This has two impacts, and the first is charging up the developing world. While it is hard to imagine, the International Energy Agency writes that currently 17% of the global population lacks access to electricity, also known as energy poverty. According to Brian Walsh of Time, 95% of those lacking electricity are located in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. He furthers, due to its lack of global attention and the effect on an individual's health and wealth, energy poverty is the worst kind of poverty. Luckily, the solution is near. As a 2014 article from The Atlantic explains, nations in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia have the ability to leapfrog outdated energy grids and start from scratch at the cutting edge as they enter their era of development. In his analysis for the Global Energy Institute, Peter Meissen found that increasing access to electricity had a strong positive relationship with life expectancy and GDP per capita, while significantly decreasing mortality rates. Second is making energy clean. According to a report by the ABB Group, smart grids have the capacity to not only make current energy more efficient, but also integrate low-carbon energy sources into pre-existing power grids, such as solar or wind power. As Rishi Bhattanger of SAP states, the Internet of Things is a vital mechanism for the advancement of green energy. This is why Oscar Alvarez of the KTH Institute found in his empirical analysis of the developed and developing world that the implementation of smart grids has historically gone hand in hand with the increased usage of renewable energy sources. The impact comes from Ashoka Kella of the National Institute of Technology, who found in his analysis of a dozen energy sources that on net, renewable energy had 1/10 of the carbon dioxide emissions that fossil fuels had. Holistically, Masood Amin of the University of Minnesota furthers, the adoption of the smart grid would cause energy efficiency to increase and emissions to decrease by 18%, which is why he finds that there is a 6-to-1 ratio of benefits to cost when it comes to adopting the smart grid. Overall, the implementation of smart grids can be seen throughout the world, not just in the United States. For instance, CNN reports that India plans to upgrade 100 cities with smart grids in the coming decade, and the China-Britain Council reports that China already has implemented almost 300 smart grids throughout various cities. Our second point of contention is creating intelligent agriculture. A Beecham research report finds that precision agriculture makes use of a range of technologies that include GPS services, sensors, and big data to optimize crop yields. Support systems, backed up by real-time data, can provide information concerning all aspects of farming at a level of precision not previously possible. This enables better decisions to be made, resulting in less waste and maximum efficiency in operations. Jeff Hahn of RCR Wireless News finds that estimates show that farmers using agriculture IoT systems can see yields increase by up to 15%, which translates up to $100 more per acre. A report from the World Bank finds that every 1% increase in crop yields reduces poverty by 0.6%. Therese Corey of Beecham Research warns that if the farming industry does not embrace the use of precision agriculture and harness the emerging Internet of Things, it will be literally impossible to feed the world's population by 2050. Feed the world and affirm.
Before you start, can I have a couple of cards? The 1/10 CO2 card, the Asunamine of the University of Minnesota, and then the 1% increase in crop yield leads to 6.4% decrease in poverty.
Yeah, wait, you asked for 2 different cards?
Yeah.
No, like you asked for 3 cards in total. Group 2 together, the 1/10 and the amine.
Oh, yes. I'll just do the Asunamine then, the 18% card?
Yeah.
Sure. Just Asunamine, the terminal impact of your first contention and the 1% increase in crop yields leads to 6.4%.
Well, there's 3 terminal impacts.
It's just the Asunamine card, just the 18%, yeah.
What's the E? Small one is a mean, big one
This is a mean.
World Bank.
This is World Bank. It's 0.48.
Sounds good. Start prep.
Okay.
No, all right. And prep. There's 20 seconds each. Thank you. Use more. All right, and prep. Another 18 seconds. Sounds good. Yeah.
Ready? Jack and I negate a result on balance the benefits of the Internet of Things outweigh the harms of decreased personal privacy. Contention 1, democracy. Rose 2015 from the Internet Society explains that privacy concerns are amplified by the Internet of Things. That's because the familiarity and social embrace of many IoT devices creates a false sense of security, which encourages individuals to divulge private information without full awareness of the potential consequences. The Center for Democracy and Technology concludes in 2014 that there are substantial risks inherent in the Internet of Things. A loss of privacy leads to weak democracy. McFarland of Santa Clara University explains the harm, finding that increasing individual privacy and limiting surveillance is a prerequisite of liberal democratic societies. That's because the democratic society relies on publicity as a control of a government and on privacy as a shield for group and individual life. Overall, Howard Political finds that in authoritarian countries, the Internet of Things will be another tool for social control. Even in democracy, the privacy threats are enormous, as is the potential for political manipulation that could lead to authoritarian governments. Weak democracy leads to more war. Bennett of Penn State University finds that Democratic governments are 82% less likely to go to war because voters force leaders to accept culpability for war losses. One IoT technology, in particular, drones, are extremely likely to cause war. In fact, Tucker of Defense One finds that due to its close proximity with flashpoints, naval drones are among the most likely potential triggers of World War III. Contention 2, hacking. Groman 2016 of the Intel Security Group explains that most organizations lack the resources for ground-up infrastructure rebuilding. This means that they rely on legacy systems with IoT technology added on an ad hoc basis. What this means is that Forrest 2016 of ZDNet reports that this creates inherent network vulnerabilities, where compromising a single IoT device can give hackers access to everything connected. This is problematic because McGill 2016 of Atlantic explains that basic IoT devices are extremely vulnerable to hacking attempts. This breach of privacy through hacking can be seen specifically in two key areas, and the first is public infrastructure. The Organization of American States 2015 explains that the connecting public infrastructure, such as energy or water distribution, oil pipelines, or dams, create a fertile haven for attackers. The OAS furthers that an estimated 43% of all major North or South American infrastructure has been attacked, with 76% major infrastructure operators reporting that the attacks are not only getting worse, but more sophisticated as the IoT expands. To make matters even worse, such vulnerabilities lead to a culture of hacking. As Lorman 2015 of GT News reports that cyber gangs and international cartels are developing sophisticated cyber attack technology to take over infrastructure. And the second is medical technology. Brock 2015 of Motherboard reports that the single greatest threat to global cybersecurity is via medical devices, where hackers can install ransomware to not only steal data, but also to postpone vital medical functions until a ransom is paid. Westf Test Target furthers that IoT connects the data to a network outside the building. What this means is that that's problematic because sensitive private information for patients across the world are more exposed. InfoSec Institute explains that each attack damages both the healthcare organization by an average of $2 million per healthcare entity per year, as well as an average of 2,000 individuals whose identities are stolen per breach. The ICIT quantifies the full scope, reporting that 47% of Americans has had their personal healthcare data compromised in the past year. No matter where the hacking occurs, it causes a chilling effect on the technology use at the commercial level. Bailey 2014 of the McKinsey Institute reports that the true cost of cybercrime is causing governments and companies to fear risk of upgrading their technology, not only in IoT, but also in cloud computing. concluding that as many as 90% of mature companies decide not to pursue innovative technology because of cybersecurity fears, leading to $3 trillion in global losses. For these reasons, please negate the resolution.
Let us see like your paper case.
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alright. Everyone ready? Judges? Okay. So, if I'm living in a developing country and I don't have access to electricity, and then like I get a smart grid, but then like the power goes down for 1 week, which one is like a preferable alternative? Should someone live in a world in which they don't have access to electricity, or in which they have access and maybe it goes out for a week or so?
This is a lot of ifs, first of all.
Okay.
But second,
Which one?
I don't know, like,
Okay.
why is the premise
Is it preferable for me to not have electricity at all, or for there to be like a short blackout?
I don't think that's like a comparable analysis.
I think it is, because if we implement the smart grid, and let's say the smart grid does get hacked, and maybe it goes down for like a week, that's still beneficial because in the long run, I'm going to have access to electricity, right?
Whereas
I did not
I don't
before.
think this like resolution can be like smart grid versus nothing at all. Like I don't think that's like what the resolution
Okay,
is.
so what we're saying specifically, in areas where there's no like electricity grid right now, those are the areas where the smart grid has the most potential to be developed, in like sub-Saharan Africa and Asia.
So like sub-Saharan African villages will suddenly get like high-tech smart grid technology?
No, not villages. Maybe like cities that like are in need of a grid. They get.
Wait, so cities don't have electricity?
They don't. Some cities don't. Like some cities, they need to expand access. So instead
So like
of
Cairo,
just
Egypt,
okay,
or like
hold on,
yeah,
hold on.
sure, go ahead.
So instead of like these outdated grids, they can just go right to a smart grid, which doesn't have all the added harms, and they can facilitate the implementation of clean energy.
I'm like really confused about the leapfrogging idea, right? So like how exactly
It's not that confusing.
How exactly does like villages like leapfrog?
What?
How exactly do like poor people
Okay.
in
Look,
Africa like
if the
leapfrog?
technology for the smart grid is developed, which it is right now, you
Okay.
don't have to implement outdated systems in those areas. Instead, you can go directly to a smart grid instead of a conventional grid. Let's talk about your second intention about hacking.
Sure, go ahead.
Why does like the minimal threat that something might be hacked outweigh the overall like benefits when there is a technology?
Because you do, like this is like the McKinsey card at the very bottom, right?
Yeah.
What we tell you is that not only do people like not upgrade like their IoT technology,
Okay.
but they also don't innovate in like
Let's
cloud
talk about the idea
computing.
of like computers.
Um,
When computers
I
were like early in like their development, there's a fear they're going to be hacked, right?
Um,
Sure,
you tell
right?
me.
All right, I'm gonna say yes. So does that mean
Okay,
that all
this is another
businesses like
premise, but
didn't
sure.
shift towards computers?
Like a shift towards computers?
Yeah, you told me 90%. That seems like very implausible.
I mean, you can see the card. It does say 90% of mature companies like.
Okay, well, my
Yeah.
point is that as it goes on to the future and they do see that the technology is safe, there's a reason why the projections have the IoT like exploding in the coming years. And it's because companies are investing in cybersecurity as they continue to like, as the IoT continues to grow. So what that means is that your argument is a static argument. It's assuming that companies don't invest any more in
Do
cybersecurity
you
when in
think
reality
hackers
they
invest?
do.
Like, do you think like insofar as there's so much economic potential?
Some
you
do
think
and
hackers
some
invest?
don't. Especially the ones who are like unmotivated, they're going to drop out as
Unmotivated
cybersecurity
hackers?
becomes greater.
So there's going to be unmotivated hackers. Sorry.
All three of the judges ready? Once. Yeah. So let's start on their first contention about eroding the principles of democracy. One critical overarching response here is that with the spread of the Internet of Things, there will proceedingly be a spread of the Internet. The reasoning for this is that the Internet of Things, in order to work and be functioning in the context of the economy, is that the Internet connectivity has to exist there. This is why the GSMA finds in 2014 that the Internet of Things will finance the expansion of broadband networks, and they speculate that by 2020, there will be a tripling in the amount of devices connected to the broadband network. As a result of the spread of the Internet, there are two key benefits, the first of which comes from Georgia Wade of Georgia Georgia State University, who finds that allowing half of the population to connect to the internet causes political discussion, creating a shift of democratization, which is why she finds that internet connectivity increases political rights and civil liberties by 15%. When they talk about eroding democracies, the opposite occurs because we have more political discussion and more communication, which inherently challenges authoritarian regimes. We solve back to the problem that they talk about by spreading the internet and the Internet of Things. The second impact comes from Chuang Yu of Guangzhou University, who finds that a 10 percentage point increase in internet penetration rate raises real GDP per capita by 0.6 percentage points. That's important because those are macroeconomic benefits that everyone experiences. Now let's go a little bit deeper into their contention, specifically on this Howard evidence they read you. It says that the Internet of Things will be used by authoritarian governments for social control. The problem is we call for the evidence, and it says literally that democracies will use it to be more effective democracies and to be more representative. All it says in the piece of evidence is that authoritarian rulers have their ideas of what they will use this technology for. And nowhere does it say they will use it for social control. Don't let them gain ground to that. Even more so, they then talk about how the Internet of Things, they then make this huge leap to this idea of drones. Problematically, what Jonathan Canby of Business Insider finds is that the majority of government funding is going to smart grids and not drones, but for our actual usage of the Internet of Things over their hypothetical cherry-picked example of one really bad instance. Even more so, recognize that the majority of drones are not warfare drones, but are instead agricultural drones, which are immensely beneficial on net. This comes from the Association of Unmanned Vehicles, finds that agricultural drones will make up 80% of the drone market in the near future. Even more so, what Chris Anderson of MIT finds is that these drones cost under $1,000, which is why Kevin Price of Kansas State University finds that in the coming decade, every single farmer in the world will have an agricultural drone. The benefit of this comes from the Federation of Farmers, who finds that agricultural drones have the potential to increase yields by up to 3%. Cross-apply the evidence we read you from Case, which says that every 1% increase in yields decreases poverty by 0.6 percentage points. If you think drones are part of the IoT, you're going to be affirming in today's round because it lifts people out of poverty, it doesn't kill people. Let's then move on to their second contention about hacking. This is incredibly problematic for a couple of reasons. The first is that truly damaging cyber attacks are few and far between. Instead, what James Lewis of the Center for Strategic Studies finds is that very low-level cyber attacks are more frequent. This is corroborated by Carrera's security report, who finds that 80% of cyber attacks are less than 1 gigabyte, meaning that they are incredibly easy to deal with on-premise. Even more so, this is simply a problem that exists right now, and it gets faded out as time passes. The reasoning for this is that companies invest more money into cybersecurity. As Hank Scorney of Newstar finds, 84% of organizations that have IoT technology are currently increasing their spending in cybersecurity. The quantification for this comes from Steve Morgan of Forbes, who finds that spending for cybersecurity will double globally in the next 5 years. Even more so, the impact calculus to do here is that groups that do cyber attacks, absent cyber attacks, result in physical warfare. That comes from Kelsey Atherton of PS Magazine. We would contend that the trade-off between cyber attacks and physical warfare, you will always be defaulting to cyber attacks because lives will not be lost. But let's look at the two specific types of cyber attacks they give you. The first is infrastructure. They tell you that 43% of infrastructure has been attacked. We call it for this evidence. It says 43% of infrastructure has had attacks detected. This means that an attack was detected and then stopped, and there was no real impact. That's why they can either do an actual impact or an actual instance of any meaningful attack on infrastructure. Then their second impact is all about medical information. The problem is, again, there's no quantification of the impact here. They cannot tell you how many medical cyber attacks there have been and how many lives were lost or how many identities were stolen. Rather, a bunch of hypotheticals about what one attack may do make them show you the probability that an attack will occur. They then tell you very explicitly under the case that by not adopting the IoT, we lose out on $3 trillion globally in just the first year alone. If that doesn't show the immense benefits of the IoT, I don't know what else does. Thus, I urge you to affirm.
All right, we'll take some prep time.
Okay. The biggest impact we should be weighing in today's round is war. That's because war creates instability that destroys development, creates social regression, and creates the kind of technological world where there are smart grids and agricultural developments impossible. That's why the single biggest impact in this round should be to war. With that in mind, let's go on to their first contention, which is about essentially electronic smart grids. Overall, on the top of the warrant, there's one major problem. This comes from Trembaugh of the Breakthrough Journal, who finds that when electricity production is made more efficient, prices go down, and thus the result is that people consume more. In fact, looking specifically to China in the residential sector, he found that such a rebound effect resulted in a 132 to 165% increase in consumption. That means implementing smart grids makes energy consumption go up. Now let's look at their first warrant, where they talk about the developing world. The first problem overall here is that they don't give you any reason why smart grids are more likely to be implemented in the developing world than regular grids. The reason that the developing world doesn't have regular grids right now is that they can't afford it. Are smart grids cheaper? They're not. They don't give you that analysis. That's why you have absolutely no marginal benefit in implementing the Internet of Things over implementing regular grids in the region. But my second response is that you prefer regular grids to smart grids because the Organization of American States tells you that when you have public infrastructure like smart grids implemented in developing countries without the supporting security, it's easy to be hacked. That means that when you implement such an infrastructure in like Peru, for instance, or a developing country, hackers are going to come in and take it over easily. Go to their second one where they talk about clean and efficient energy. First, we looked at their link card and it has a number of conclusions. Essentially what it's doing is it's just saying, hey, I think there's a correlation between like this green energy and like smart grids. There's no warrant connecting them. There's no causal effect. But my second response is, going along those lines, there's no reason that it has to be green energy that goes up. It could just as easily be fracking, nuclear energy, or anything else that produces significant amount of environmental waste. My third response is that on net, implementing the Internet of Things is going to be worse for the environment. That's because Triviality of Lucerne University finds that because IoT devices are always on and battery powered, they consume 20% more electricity than regular devices. This means that energy production is still going up. But fourth, over all of the smart grids, you can see that it results in a serious regression for all environmental movements. That's because Levinson of the Journal of Issues and Sciences finds that the complex and volatile nature of smart grids makes consumers bear a risk, i.e. when they bear a risk, it starts delegitimizing anti-environmental movements. Consumers think, here's this new crazy technology that they're implementing to try and save the environment. I'm taking a risk to try and save the environment, and when it doesn't work out, they think that it's a bad thing, and so it delegitimizes environmental movements as a whole, flow that is a harm against the environment. Then on their second contention, they talk about agriculture. My first response comes from Williams of Wired magazines that finds that, especially in the developing world, when such technology breaks down, there's no one there to fix it. When something goes wrong, it can't be implemented, like it can't be fixed, so then they just need to buy a new one. This creates like a constant cycle where farmers are having to buy new technology and they can't maintain it. My second response comes from Greg Riss of the Royce Law Firm that finds that there's no legal precedent for who actually owns this agricultural data and Internet of Things. This means that farmers could just as easily be bound to large agri-corporations who actually own the data, and they don't own their own data. My third response comes from Deloitte Consulting that finds that a lot of this technology in the status quo is controlled by large corporations. At the end of the day, agribusinesses are the ones benefiting the status quo that only perpetuates inequality, where we start to prefer monoculture over independent farmers. But my fourth response comes from Eric Jimenez that finds that in the status quo, we're producing 1.5 times the food that humanity needs, and the growth rate of production is much faster than the growth rate of humanity. The problem is about inequality and small farmers not having the money to upgrade their technology. At the end of the day, since they fundamentally don't solve for the fact that farmers won't be able to afford this technology, they can't access the World Bank card about improving upgrades. Finally, go briefly to our first contention. My partner will talk more about it, but I want to address the Howard card specifically. Howard says that the Internet of Things is the most powerful political tool ever created. For democracies, it affects how voters treat government, and for autocracies, it affects how the government treats.
Is everybody ready? Oh, so
Yeah, sorry.
no worries. All right. So you tell us at the top of your rebuttal that war is the biggest impact. Does that mean the only way we can win this round is by saying that the Internet of Things stops war from happening?
I mean, no. Like, if you can show that your effects are more important, obviously not. But
You established the framework that
Sure.
war is the #1 impact. So tell me, just so like Harish knows what to do in summary,
Sure.
how the affirmative team accesses the impact of war.
Sure, you tie your impacts into war.
How? Like
I'm not going to give you that link. I'm proposing.
I'm just.
Here's
like,
the thing, right?
Here's like you can't come up here and just say like war is the most important impact when we
Sure.
literally have no like. We can't argue the Internet of Things decreases war or stops war
Why?
from happening. Because that's not the Internet of Things isn't created as an
Sure.
anti-war
But
tool.
here's what the Wayne framework does, right? I'm coming up here and I'm showing you this disadvantage is bigger than all the advantages for this reason. That's what the framework does.
And the reasoning for that is lives, right?
Not necessarily. I
What-
specifically related to instability, like essentially as a prerequisite for development.
With then like that instability costs lives, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we can both agree that the biggest impact in today's round is lives, whether you want to access it through war or pulling people out of
No,
poverty. or
not
putting food on the
necessarily.
plate.
Because
Why?
simply implementing like upgraded agricultural technology doesn't stop the
Right.
underlying political instability that's caused by having more authoritarian regimes and more wars.
So democratization solves for those underlying instabilities.
that's not our advocacy.
I know,
Our
that's my
advocacy is
advocacy.
simply avoiding making regimes more authoritarian.
I know. You
Yeah,
say,
sure.
So
Sure, yeah,
just-
democratization would solve
All right,
it. Yeah.
and then you tell us that like we would turn to fracking or nukes, and that when prices
Sure.
go down, dirty energy consumption goes up. Like those are like things that make logical sense. But we tell you from Alvarez that historically smart grids increase green energy, right? So which do the judges prefer? Like the logical, like this makes sense that it happens, or the real world, like this is what happened.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, right? You're literally showing something with absolutely no correlation. You're just saying in the past, we've had green tech and we've also had smart grids.
No.
Look, there must be a connection.
No, Alvarez says that when you implement a smart grid in a country, historically, that country has also undergone extreme increases in their usage of green energy.
Sure. At the point when a country is implementing a smart grid, might not only already be on the verge of like a technological revolution where they're also likely to implement other technologies like green technology?
I mean, that was a lot of like speculative, like
No, I'm
if
just
then
saying-
maybe might.
Right, I'm just
like,
saying that there's alternative warrants out there. Like insofar as you don't show
I
a
understand
positive
that there might
impact.
be. Well, no, I understand that there might be like outside forces acting upon it, but like
Sure.
the end of the day, the Alvarez analysis is incredibly clear in stating that countries historically, when they implement smart grids, also see increases in the usage of green technology in the following years, right? So even
Okay.
though like your analysis makes like logical sense, like Rish and I will agree, like sure, historically the precedent has been set that smart grids cause a shift to green energy.
That's time.
So starting off on this like war analysis that he gives you, the link into why war happens is his first contention. So let's look at his first contention about suppressing democracy. There are a lot of things that he doesn't respond to in rebuttal, namely is the internet turns sandprints on their case. Realize the weight analysis tells us that there's if one half of the population gets internet as a natural extension of the Internet of Things, that increases the amount of democracy 15% per the Freedom House scale. Now the reason why that's important is because the free exchange of ideas through the internet allows the democratic process to take shape. It allows for the free exchange of ideas. It literally erodes autocratic governments. But then secondly, realize the analysis saying due to Jerome Chu is that a 10% increase in the internet also increases per capita income 0.6%. Now the reason why that's going to be important is because we're lifting people out of poverty. Now moreover, they talk about this idea of drones. Realize the Alvarez analysis tells us that drones are comprise 80% of the market, and Price tells us that in the future they'll be cheap enough that farms can afford them. That leads to a 3% increase in yield. If you ever want to have a chance of solving world hunger by 2050, you need to have increases in yield. Distribution is simply not enough. Then on their idea of hacking, realize the Forbes evidence that Sam Rizzo says that there's 2 times increase in spending on cybersecurity as we go into the future. Their argument is null. Let's go back over our case. First on the idea of green energy, realize one, we tell you that developing countries can adopt it better because they can leapfrog outdated grids, but he tries to tell you that developing countries can't afford it. Realize the reason why they can is through foreign direct investment. That's how China and India got their grids. That's what's going to be important into the future. But moreover, the second on the idea of clean energy, realize with the Alvarez analysis, he tells you that there's no reason why green energy would be adopted, but the Alvarez analysis denies what he's saying, and it says that historically the adoption of the smart grid has gone hand in hand with clean energy. That leads to 1/10 of the total emissions. He tells you that they're going to use more electricity. The Amin analysis is very clear, saying that even if this is true, emissions still go down to 18%. At the end of the day, Amin is the clearest place you can sign your ballot, 6-to-1 ratio of benefits to harms. Now, and lastly, on the idea of agriculture, realize that as we continue into the future, this technology will get cheaper. It can be adopted in developing countries. That's a 15% increase in yield, and for every 1% increase in yield, we see a 0.6% decrease in poverty. I see that as the clearest place to go.
All right, we'll use some prep time.
Actually, wait, before we use the overview, it goes uncontested throughout the round that war causes instability, and that's a prerequisite to implementing IoT technology or any technology at all. That's why war is the biggest impact in this round. If we win war, we win the round. So that's why the first and the most important voter in this round is going to be democracy and war. Their first argument is that IoT means internet, and that internet means democracy. I looked at the code. What it actually says was just a pure correlation and never give you a causal link. That's why you should prefer the O'Neill perspective that explains that internet has become dominated by corporate and government interests, which means that even if there's internet, that means that overall there's going to be suppression of views that are unpopular. Second, you should also look at the Noma of Colombia card that says that when you implement the internet, what actually happens is that there should be an increase in the amount of suppression. That's a turn on their case. Internet actually decreases democracy. Now let's move on to the CDT card, which is that there's risk inherent in the Internet of Things. Privacy risk, that's important because McFarlane says that privacy is an inherent component of democracy. Without privacy, we don't have democracy. That's why you can clearly extend that we have more authoritarian governments. That's huge because Bennett explains that there's going to be an 82% increase in war when you have more authoritarian governments. That's a huge reason to vote for us. Then you go on to agriculture thing. You can accept all their impacts. Remember that surveillance drones, which is 20% of the market according to their own card, could cause World War III. That's another reason why you should vote for the neg in this round. The second main voter in this round is going to be efficiency. There's one huge turn that they miss, which is the Trumbull card, which explains that when you make things more efficient, you have more people consuming carbon emissions, and you have more people actually consuming things. That's important because Trumbull concludes that there's going to be a 165% increase in carbon emissions. If you want to vote off energy and you want to vote off the environment, you should be voting for us. Then on agriculture, there's two things that they miss. First, remember the Jimenez card that says that right now we're producing more than we can feed. We can actually produce more. We can produce enough food for 10 billion people, which is 2050. And also the Gregorio card that says that what actually happens is that IoT bounds firms, which means that in the long term, small farmers are hurt. They are not helped. That means that increases social inequality.
Okay, you guys ready for Grant?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's talk about democracy. Explain to me why the internet strengthens autocracies.
Okay, so the reason is that when you implement the internet, especially in developing countries, it's not the internet we know in America. Like, look at China, look at Iran. When they implement internet, it's like a limited version with firewalls.
But at least-
My follow-up question would be, isn't some internet better than no internet at all?
I would propose no, and in fact, the card that Peter introduces in summary says no, because like when it's implemented, more often than not, it's a tool for political manipulation
I
than
mean,
truly
even if
So,
it's
like,
used in
ideas.
some
The
instances
reason
as
why-
a tool for political manipulation, there is still some access to free exchange of ideas, whereas when there's no internet,
Yeah.
there's no exchange of free ideas at all.
So the
right?
Nome of Columbia card that I read in second summary said that like it looked at all the warrants that you guys give, right? Like this idea of freedom of exchange, like all the other warrants that you give, and found that like that only applies to like specific people and specific incidents, and that overall on like a macro level, what's actually happening is that governments are controlling like what their people can do.
What's that an analysis of?
Huh?
What is that an analysis of?
He's just like giving like warrants.
Yeah, like, why, like,
Again, but like, this is like Wade is a historical analysis on actual countries. Again, kind of like this whole
Sure,
idea of
but
like
that's just
reality.
like that's just like a what Peter said was that was a correlation.
So what
right?
about
countries that have the
non-autocratic
internet also
countries?
tend to
What
be
about
free.
non-autocratic countries that don't have internet? Let's take the example of Zimbabwe. Is the expanding internet access in countries like Zimbabwe a good thing or a bad thing?
One, I think Zimbabwe probably already has the internet, like to a large extent.
Not to a large extent, no.
I mean, I've been to Zimbabwe,
Okay.
and like that,
I don't see how that
there's
changes
definitely
anything.
internet there.
Okay,
Like,
especially
especially in the
when
city,
they got
right?
internet
Like-
in like the one remote area of Zimbabwe you've been to.
Pick a different
Yeah.
developing country. It's still the same thing.
Sure, I think that when it's like
Yeah.
once again when it's implemented there, especially if like the people in power, as we propose, are going to be more
What if it's like
authoritarian
a democratic
oligarchs.
government, a free government that really doesn't care about repressing its people that much?
Here's the thing, right? Even like a democratic government in like many of those countries, like Central African states or some like Southeast Asian states, still tend to be
Okay,
largely
again,
authoritarian and like self-serving
So,
in nature.
like, just also, what drone strike is like the bright line for World War
It's not a
III?
drone strike, it's surveillance drones. Like what Tucker specifically
Yeah.
talks about
Wait,
is like
so surveillance drones cause
Yeah.
World War III?
No, it's just saying that surveillance drones flying around global flashpoints
Yeah.
where there's
World War
already
III.
these tensions between autocracies
Yeah.
is like what could be the trigger that like
Yeah.
pushes us over the edge.
What's the
That's what
probability of that?
Tucker says is the most likely trigger of World War III.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to be a low probability, but increasing this probability from nothing to
but like
something.
my
is
grandmother
still
told me
ridiculous.
last week that like Donald Trump will start World War III. Like there's a probability of that too. Like you need to be able to give the.
I would argue that
comparative,
probability is pretty high.
Okay.
But I mean,
Awesome.
like,
So then we'll just run with that as like being like the bigger link into it.
no,
I mean,
but like
I
at the
see
end of the
why
day,
it's
the
awesome.
mechanism by which that happens is surveillance drones that like intrude on other nations' territory.
Alright, we'll run the remaining 15 seconds. It's gonna go their first contention, our first contention, our second contention, which is also theirs. First contention. I'll sign. Who judges? Who votes?
Yep.
Girish?
Holistically, the Internet of Things makes the world a better place. There's 3 ways in which this happens. First is war, what they want to talk so heavily about. He says himself that war is because of political instability. So if you believe that the Internet of Things inherently makes countries more stable, then you're going to be affirming it today around per his own framework. We give you the reasoning for that, and that is that with the Internet of Things comes the spread of the Internet, which inherently comes the spread of democracy. We give you the weight analysis, which says that with the spread of Internet, you see a 15% increase in democracy and political liberties and civil rights. That is because political discussion takes shape of democracy as it exists. What that means is that we actually stabilize countries and subsequently decrease the chance of war. If you believe that war is such a huge impact in today's round, you're going to be affirming in today's round because that's the only chance you have at making countries more stable and preventing World War III that we both agree is so likely in Grand Crossfire. The second way that we make the world a better place is through the environment. We both agreed in Second Crossfire that while he might have his logical responses, Alvarez is what is true. Holistically and empirically, he finds that when countries implement the smart grid, we see an increase in the use of green technology, and that's incredibly beneficial because Ashoka Kella finds that they have 1/10 of the carbon emissions of that of dirty energy. Amin finds that even if we still use dirty energy, there's an 18% decrease in emissions because of an 18% increase in efficiency that's on net helping the environment. The third way we make the world a better place is hunger. Agricultural drones goes uncontested on their side. What the UAV finds is that 80% of the drone market will be agricultural drones, so even if war drones exist, that's not on balance a harm. Even more so, what Price tells you is even if they're expensive now, every single farm will have one in the next decade. What the FBF tells you is they experience a 3% increase in yields. And what the World Bank tells you is that for every 1% increase in yields, you see a 0.6% decrease in poverty. That's more food on the table and more people pulled out of poverty as a result of the Internet of Things. Thus, I urge you to affirm in today's round.
All right, we'll use our remaining prep time. I think we have like 25 seconds. All right, is everyone ready? Okay. Start with the uncontested overview that war leads to political instability. That's why it's the biggest impact in the round. They try to come up here in final focus and say that instability creates war. That's not our warrant. We say that war creates instability. That's going to be important because our first and most important voter is going to be about democracy. This leads to war in 2 ways. A, because of increased authoritarianism. Their argument is that via the IoT, there's more internet. However, Peter stands up here in summary and tells you that when the internet is implemented, right now, this is the O'Neill card, it tends to be manipulated by corporations and government. At that point, you see it's not the bastion of free speech they're talking about, it's a tool for social control. What's more, like they give you and so you, for the comparative analysis, you look to Noam, who tells you even considering their warrants, it's still used for that control. That means you can extend McFarland, telling you that the spread of the IoT is leading to a crackdown on privacy, more authoritarian regimes is our analysis. So at the end of the day, you can extend the Bennett card, telling you there's an 82% more increased chance of war because there's more autocracies. But B, the second way you can connect to war here is via drones. That's because we tell you the IoT gives you this mechanism, right, surveillance drones in flashpoints to create World War III when the world is already unstable. That's what it leads to. That's the clearest way to sign your ballot. But even if you don't buy that, we win on their side of the flow. The second voter is going to be about green technology. Here they try to extend the Alvarez card about historical correlations, but it's just that, a correlation. At the end of the day, when countries are rich enough to afford the smart grid stuff, they're also rich enough to afford green tech. Here's the problem though. When they implement a smart grid, we give you the Trembaugh analysis telling you there's a rebound effect of 132 to 165%. That means consumption goes up, energy goes up. That's an unresponded to turn. So if you want to vote up green tech, you see that it's just making the world a dirtier place. The third and final way you can vote is going to be along agriculture. They extend this like drones card that like drones lead to increased yields. There's increased yields. However, you can look to the terminal difference from Jimenez that tells you that right now in the status quo, we're producing way more than enough food. The problem is inequality. These farmers can't implement the technology, and even if they do, their problem isn't that they're producing enough. Finally, it's in the Gregorius that the corporations are controlling their IoT data in the first place. So that means they're just being manipulated. Farmers aren't hurt. Weigh that against the framework. For these reasons, please engage.
My name is